Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we are playing the King's Indian defense against everything, while I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I can for your education and entertainment as we climb to 2000 ELO, only using this opening. So against d4 we have to start with d6, against d4 or c4 we can start with knight f6, but it's important to start with d6 because obviously the plan is knight f6, g6, bishop g7, castles, right? The classic setup. But if e4 is on the board, then d6 must be played to stop e5. And my opponent goes for this, which just gives us a pawn, which we should obviously take. Now the thing is, especially at lower ratings, if you try to play a certain opening, a lot of the time your opponent is, well, okay, maybe not a lot of the time, but sometimes your opponent is just going to play something completely nonsensical, right? Which is this. Obviously, white is playing this as if I've played, e5 and knight c6 and played a normal opening. But we're not playing a normal opening. As in, we're not playing the king's pawn. We're playing a king's Indian. We can go ahead and continue with our plan, though. Obviously, we've got to make sure there's no tactics on f7, but if we can just go bishop g7 and castle, we're going to be absolutely fine here. So we can just go ahead and drop the knight back. I'm aware we could go d5 in this position rather than knight g6. Sorry, rather than pawn g6. And here my opponent's essentially forcing me to go d5 to prevent the issues on f7. My opponent is basically forcing us to change our plans a bit. But it's really not a big deal. Like, we're still going to get a King's Indian type setup. Is our opponent playing in a particularly great way against it? No. But that's kind of just chess. Particularly below, like, 1600, people will just play anything a lot of the time. So, bishop b5 check. Is that a problem? No, we can just go c6 and kick the bishop away with tempo. Here, should we go pawn b5 and kick the bishop again back to b3? What would you do? Would you go b5? Personally, I don't like the look of the move. It doesn't accomplish anything. b5, we kick the bishop back, sure. Now b5 maybe makes more sense, because after the bishop is kicked back, we can go b4, kicking the knight. So it makes a bit more sense. I still don't like it, though, because after knight to a4, c5 is actually quite a nice square for the knight to land on, being supported by like a pawn on d4. So I'm just going to completely ignore what white's doing on the queenside, because we don't need to be concerned. We can continue with moves like e5 and just take a big center. We also don't need to be concerned about this knight on g5. It is not threatening anything. We can kick it away with h6 if we want to. h6 will kick the knight away. But I would argue that's actually helping white, because one, we're creating a target on h6. Yeah, we can defend it with king h7, I know, and the bishop is defending it, but it is creating a target. But also, the knight on f3 is much better, because it's controlling the actually important square on e5, which is where I'd love to put my pawn if white allows me to. I'd love to go like e5, rook e8, bishop e6, knight d7, I don't know, something like that. That looks very nice to me. So there's no point playing h6 to help white improve his position. We should just allow the knight to be bad. Okay, b4. That's interesting. We can actually set quite a nice trap here. It's actually a really nice trap. So you should notice the alignment of the bishop with the knight, right? Now the issue is, the move that we want to kind of play is knight e4, but after take and take, rook here, we don't actually win any material, right? We just trade a knight for a knight. So how can we set a trap here? Well, the move I'm looking at is queen d6, which I think is a very nice move, because the point is that we are making sure that we can move the knight with a threat, right? Queen h2 checkmate. That's why we're going queen d6. But rather than queen c7, right, which accomplishes the same goal. I prefer queen d6 because we're also targeting b4. It's kind of a double attack in a weird way, right? We're trying to set up too many threats for white to deal with. So we're encouraging white to play a move like pawn b5, which I assume is the point of b4 anyway, or rook b1. We're encouraging white to defend this pawn, while not realizing the greater threat of knight g4. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. And this may be quite a quick game, and we may well hop into a second one after this. The reason this is so bad for white is because the knight is hanging and checkmate is hanging. But you may be saying, well, can't white play, I don't know, pawn h3 and, you know, attack the knight so that if we take this, then he takes our knight? Well, no, because we're threatening checkmate. It's just checkmate. So g3 is effectively forced, and then we nab the knight on c3. Again, this tactic wouldn't work. This tactic would not work if we'd have played pawn h6, kicking the knight back to f3. Right? Think about that. This tactic would... Okay, we would still be better, but we wouldn't be up a whole piece if the knight was kicked back to f3. Because the knight is better on f3, because it would be defending h2. Right? So that's actually really interesting, because this is proving how misplaced the knight is on g5, that white has lost a whole piece because of it. Now, granted, b4 is certainly not the move, right? We can, like, you know, the King's Indian is all about this dark square diagonal, and weakening it beyond belief by playing b4 is certainly not the best way to go. But the point still stands. This knight is not participating in the game at all. Okay, so, rant over. Bishop f4, targeting the queen. How should we defend it? Well, we can go pawn to e5, kicking the bishop away with tempo. That looks valid, although it does prevent our bishop from coming back to its square on g7. Alternatively, we could go bishop to e5, offering a bishop trade, and if it's declined, the bishop can go back to g7. So I prefer this, personally. And you may be saying, oh, Alex, should you really be trading your fianchettoed bishop? Like, isn't that weakening your king massively? Well, yes and no, because it does weaken the dark squares, sure, but remember we're up a piece and a pawn, so trades favor us, typically. And also, we're trading off both of the dark squared bishops. So even if we lose our dark squared bishop, we get rid of white's dark squared bishop. So theoretically, our dark squares shouldn't really be that weak, because white doesn't have his best piece to exploit them, right? Hopefully that makes sense. And also, you know, if white declines the trade, then he's wasting even more time. So let's say, I don't know, bishop to d2. I mean, I don't see any immediate wins or anything, but I suppose we can go d5, bishop back, knight a6. No, maybe not knight a6, maybe knight d7 into f6, something like that. I don't know. Obviously, we want to attack the white king, but if there's no actual attack, then we shouldn't try to force it unnecessarily. Although we do have to be careful about knight d7, because we don't want to hang our knight on g4, because remember, that is defended by our bishop, so knight d7 would disconnect the bishop, which wouldn't be ideal. Okay, queen f3. What should we play here? What should we play? Of course we should take. The queen f3 doesn't pose a threat. It defends the bishop, but if he wants to take with the queen, obviously I'll happily trade queens, because we're up a piece and a pawn. If he takes with a pawn, well, we trade the bishops, which we wanted to do anyway, but also this pawn structure kind of sucks, so that's good for us again. e5 actually looks quite tempting here, and I'm going to play it. It instinctively looks like the correct move to open up lines against the white king. The knight is still defended. We don't need to be concerned. Also destabilizing this knight, because if takes, not knight takes, although that comes with tempo on the queen. Queen g3 is kind of annoying, pinning, or even queen, no, not queen h3. The bishop defends that square. But I think I prefer just to go queen takes with tempo on the knight and threatening checkmate on h2, right? You know, white could try and attack us by going king h1, rook g1, and use the open g file, maybe. But it all seems a bit too slow. And f5 is not a concern because we can just take with the bishop. So it would be maybe different if we had to take with the g pawn, although we could still swing the queen over to h6, hitting the knight, threatening h2. So we could even have played a pawn to e4 here, opening up checkmate threats and hitting the queen. But bishop takes is also more than good enough. E4 still exists in the position. Not really a good way for white to prevent it, unless he wants to go queen g3, pinning the pawn to my queen, technically. But I don't know, queen here, knight back. Knight d7, b5, I don't know, something like that. It should be relatively easy to convert this. Should be relatively easy. But we have to prove it, of course, and we'll have to try to do it in the most accurate way possible, because, I don't know, it is difficult for white to create counterplay here, to be fair, because he's down a piece, but, like, the pieces that he does have aren't even doing anything. Like, this bishop is completely locked out of the game. Okay, well, now e4 looks very strong. Of course, if this is taken, then we take the queen. If this is taken, we checkmate on h2. There's not really any other option other than queen g3 or queen g2, or I suppose queen h1. If queen g2, defending checkmate, renewing the threat on the knight, then I suppose knight e5, or yeah, queen g3, we're obviously happy to trade. So let's take, and our knight is under attack, so we'll drop it back to e5 to maybe look to get into f3. This knight is on the verge of being trapped as well, by the way. I'm tempted to go pawn f6 to counterattack. And if take, knight f3 check looks quite nice. We're also up so much material here that even if we give away a pawn in the process, really not a big deal. Really not a big deal. We're up a lot of material. So we just want to try and get this into an endgame sort of ASAP. So take. We now have two knights versus a bishop. Not a very impressive bishop at that. Okay, let's give the check, of course. And then we just have a passed pawn as well, and we'll nab this pawn, probably with the g-pawn. Or... I think taking with the g-pawn is more accurate, but I think it's easier to take with the rook, because then we can facilitate trades on the f-file. Taking with the g-pawn would make it slightly easier to push the pawns, but... yeah, I mean, I know we also could have played... knight to d2, forking the rooks. I don't know, maybe that was cleaner. But then again, it doesn't really matter that much. We are up a lot of material. Okay, let's go knight d7. Now, if we go for this, then he can trade rooks, which again is fine. But I'd rather double the rooks and trade all the rooks off the board to make my life easier. I can also push this pawn now, because the knight is adequately defended. This bishop is out of the game. I can play knight b6, knight c4 if I want. I can really play anything. It's really not that big a deal what we do now. We just need to try to convert this quickly, and we can hop into a second game. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. And yeah. How does white do anything? It's unclear. Okay, well, let's go e3 with tempo. If rook to e2. We could go rook e8. could go rook e8, but I think I'd rather play a move like knight h4, so that if rook takes rook f3 check, I can facilitate more trades, because obviously trading is good. The trading is good. We're up a lot of material. Yeah, rook e2. There we go. Yeah, it seems like a waste of time to defend the pawn. Oh, knight d2 is interesting, actually. Okay, that's probably better. Hitting the rook. So obviously this can't be taken because the rook hangs and the knight is defended by the pawn. But the point is, if this rook moves, then we can play a move like knight c4, defending the pawn, or even rook f3 check, defending the pawn. And if the knight goes to c4 and the bishop tries to get rid of the knight, then we can also reinforce it with knight b6. So the pawn is stuck there and there's nothing white can do about it, which would obviously be favorable. Again, it's somewhat, I don't know, pedantic. Like, we're winning kind of regardless. And I don't really think we need to do an analysis on this game either. I think we can hop into a second game immediately, because I think I've been able to explain everything to adequate detail. It is interesting, though. Okay, yeah, let's just go knight c4. Keep things simple. And yeah, as we can see, this bishop has played no role in the game. Okay, let's go knight to b6 with tempo. So, of course, this can't be taken because the bishop hangs. And this pawn is not going to promote because our rook is on the back rank. Let's give a check. If the king steps up, then I probably want to try to draw it in. Although pawn h6 looks like it ends the game. Yes, I'm giving this pawn up, but after check here, I have mate on h4. I could have given this check and brought the king up the board like this, but my rook is undefended, so I can't use the other rook to give checks because this rook will hang. So I thought it would be easier to defend the g5 pawn, so that f4 would always be a defended square for the rook. And yeah, we can just deliver mate on f4. GG. Very clean game. Not much that needs to be said about it, to be fair. Let's jump into a second one. Okay, we have the white pieces this time. So we'll start with knight to f3, the reti, and go for the King's Indian attack, which is technically what it's called if we play it with the white pieces, but it follows the exact same ideas as the King's Indian defense. e5, so again, if we go bishop to g2, pawn e4, we don't really want to allow that, so we should go pawn to d3. My opponent has offered me a draw. I don't really know why he's done that, but obviously we don't want to draw. And we just go bishop d2 followed by castles. Nice and easy. We get the setter. Okay, my opponent is spamming me with draws. He's joined 3 hours ago. What? Yeah, I think it's a legit account, so I'm not really concerned about that. Okay, knight h6. So this is way too tempting an offer not to take. You may be concerned about opening up the H file, sorry, the G file, and thinking that black can attack with the G file. But no, not really. And I think we can also now take on e5, and after knight takes pawn d4, we have the center fork trick. If knight here, bishop f2, king f2, knight e5, rook f1, it's a way that black can give a desperado to, because you can lose the piece back anyway. So like knight takes, sorry, knight takes, bishop f2, king here, knight takes, rook here. That looks nice, I think. Although, maybe I have to be concerned about queen f6 type stuff. So I think it's easier just to castle, to be honest. I think that's the easiest thing to do. And then we can just play this normally. I'm not really concerned about this pawn being pushed. I always have pawn h4 if I need it. Although, for the time being, my knight can just take, so that's not an issue. Yeah, so rook g8, not really scary. I can consider this again, because now f2 is defended by the rook, so it's maybe slightly more promising. I think I should go for it. I think it makes sense now. Because now if bishop f2, rook f2, knight e5, well, it's the rook on f2. So after d4, bishop d6, take. I think I like that position. Knight c3, maybe. Maybe pawn c3. I don't know. But the point is, the black pawn structure just sucks. And also, black can't castle kingside. Castling queenside is going to take quite a while. This is an even better version. He could go for the tricky queen f6 move, threatening knight to f6 check, picking up my queen. But no, he retreats. What should we play in this position? I think there's a clearly very... Well, there's two strong moves, but I think one is superior. What would you play? Well, the move I'm looking at is queen e4 check. I think queen e3 and queen e4 are both strong. The point is that we deliver a check and we're going to win one of these pawns over here. My opponent keeps offering me draws. But queen e4 I think is better because h7 is a more juicy pawn because it comes with tempo on the rook and pressure on f7, and we're going to be up a pawn now. And obviously our king is safe and the black king is not. Okay, knight back. Bit surprised he didn't block with the queen, but no worries. I suppose it preemptively defends the rook. Maybe that's the point. We have a funny looking move, bishop to d5, if we have the chance to play it, where we're threatening f7, and if the knight takes, then the rook hangs, because the knight is defending the rook. This has been quite a tactical episode so far, hasn't it? Quite tactical. Yeah, so I mean, we could actually play this move. Is it too much, though? Because, I mean, black could just go rook f8. And then I'd have to retreat the bishop anyway. So I feel like it's too much. Let's just go knight c3. I suppose knight d5 would accomplish an even... Well, that would actually be far stronger. That would be way stronger. Because we'd be threatening knight takes knight followed by queen takes rook. Unless the king takes, but then black can't castle. But more importantly, if knight takes, then the rook hangs. And the main threat would be knight f6 check. And we can go for it right now. Again, if knight takes, then the rook hangs. And after king e7, we can take the queen, followed by taking the knight, and we'll be up a whole rook. But here we can go knight to f6 check, forcing the king to f8. And then, I mean, we could take on h6, maybe? Queen h6, rook g7, queen h8. I guess there's knight g8 there. Knight g8, knight h7. If the king moves, the rook hangs. If rook takes, queen takes. That's good. It's maybe just easier to take the rook, though. After knight takes, I mean, what are we up? Enough, clearly. We don't need to overcomplicate this. Let's just go rook d1. There is no bishop to f5 trapping the queen. The queen can always go here. Queen f6 would be an interesting option. Trying to prepare bishop f5, but knight f6 allows queen h6 check. Okay. This is very tempting. Let's go pawn e4. Of course, with the black king in the center, we want to rip open lines against the black king. So something like rook e1 and pushing looks very nice. Why is knight to g4 terrible? Because of queen d6 check, opening up the queen's line of fire, because the knight was in the way previously. And yeah, I mean, black is kind of crumbling here, but he's also down a lot of material anyway. And I think pawn h3 is just a silent killer. Because the knight has no squares. If the knight goes to f6, e5 looks problematic. Followed by e6 in some lines. Maybe not immediately, but maybe rook to e1 followed by e6. But the knight just doesn't have enough squares. Like, where's it going to go? If it comes to h5, it's safe, but it doesn't contribute anything. If it goes here, we'll just take it. I'm actually going to go rook takes, because I want to encourage bishop c6. Okay, you can take on h3. Sure, sure. And then we can trade and come into a very winning endgame. We're up an exchange in like 3 pawns. And we can actually play quite a nice move with rook d6 to put the black king in a box. The black king can't leave this box, and f6 can't be played because the rook takes. And then it's basically just the bishop trying to fend off everything else, which is not going to work, of course. We can bring the king up and escort the pawns. I can take this pawn, but it doesn't actually matter. Let's go pawn c3. And there's very little black can do. So, yeah. Well, I think we'll play another game, actually, because this was relatively easy. Yeah, let's take on a6, defending a2. And given the opportunity, I'll probably take the bishop. Or I'll take a free bishop. That's also fine. And okay, I'll play the rest of the game out quickly. As long as my opponent moves quickly. Give a check. Then we just promote. Nothing special. And then we just want to deliver checks, and eventually there will be a checkmate. And this will be a ladder checkmate. Awesome. Interesting. So, in both games, our opponents have tried to basically, like, play it like they're not playing against the King's Indian. But they are. And bishop c5 is already a step in the wrong direction. Knight h6 is pretty bad. And then, yeah, there's lots of things for us to do. But getting this position, I mean, is completely winning because of just how weak the black position is. It just has no development. No development. And obviously tactics go in our favor when we have very good development. And then the endgame is just completely winning. So let's jump into a third and final game. Okay, again, we're starting with knight f3, g3, bishop to g2, etc. All the normal stuff. I think knight f3 is probably quite a rare move at this sort of rating, I would assume. I guess everyone just goes e4 or d4. Probably mostly e4. My opponent has offered me a draw again. Do people just hate playing against the Reti? Is that it? I mean, it might be that people just despise playing against the Reti, which I don't blame them for. I really don't blame them for, because I hate playing against the Reti as well. Okay, my opponent has literally abandoned the game and auto-resigned. The Reti, the King's Indian, was that scary that he just resigned. Oh, okay. This guy is playing c6. All right, a fellow c6 player. This is what I also play. Okay, I don't go bishop f5, but it's very similar to what I play against the King's Indian. Yeah, this is interesting. So, okay. Let me think a sec. Can we go knight to h4? Chasing the bishop? Maybe, but I think d3 is reasonable. Again, this is just the King's Indian setup, right? And then we'll go from here. We can be aware of queen b3 potentially being quite nice, targeting b7. Okay, knight to f6. I've got to say knight Knight h4 is too tempting not to play. Too tempting not to play. I was slightly not as thrilled by it here because I thought that bishop e4 would force f3 to avoid a bishop trade. And then, I don't know, I didn't particularly like having the pawn on f3. Bishop c5 being, I don't know, queen b6 maybe would be annoying. But now that we have the pawn on d3, there is no access to e4. So we can chase the bishop very easily. And black can't really justify the doubling of the pawns like this, I don't think, because he can't plant a knight on e4 with a lot of support, because this is not a Catalan. Our pawn is not on d4, it's on d3. But yeah, here again, I don't have to go d3, I can go pawn h3, which I... Oh, no, okay, this is interesting. If h3, bishop back, and g4, then there's knight g4, and after I take... Well, the knight doesn't hang because the bishop hangs, actually. If h3 here, g4, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, knight f3, queen f6. That is kind of concerning. That's not the most fun line, is it? Okay. Maybe I just have to say I'm wrong and move to a different plan. That's annoying, but okay. Yeah, I just didn't consider knight takes. Okay, that's fine. How should we continue development? Bishop g5 looks nice, but I don't like h6. That's my issue. Although, take. Again, if h3, bishop back, if I go g4, my knight hangs. That's not going to work, is it? f3 doesn't help. c4 looks interesting. I'm not sure it works right now, though. So I think I'm just going to start with knight d2. And maybe e4 will be the plan. Not yet, because it's pinned. But even queen e1 followed by e4 could be a good shot. And if the black pawn pushes itself to d4, this diagonal could open up. Okay. I think knight h4 might have been wrong. But is it better with the bishop there, though? Here, 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 here. Take. Wait. Yeah, I think h3 works better now. The bishop isn't so concerning. So if bishop back, g4, bishop here, I think we take. And I don't think we should be overly concerned about the h-file opening. If g4, bishop back, sorry, if g4 knight takes, pawn takes, if bishop takes, then we take, and that's good. If g4 take, with tempo on the knight, and knight back, there's no queen f6. That was what I was thinking. So I think g4 makes sense. We'll find out, though. Theoretically, he could take with the bishop and go take and knight take, so tempo on my knight, but after knight f3, I don't see the plan. I don't even have to go knight f3, though. I can go e4. That would be even stronger. So if bishop takes, pawn takes, knight takes, e4, I play e4 with tempo on the knight. And if bishop takes knight and we take on g4, that's going to be very nice for us. So he retreats the bishop. We don't have to take it, though, because if knight g4, then we can take, because it comes with tempo on the rook. So we can wait. Although, I suppose I want to go for this anyway. Maybe f4 is interesting. Although I'm not sure I want to open up this diagonal. If take, I don't think we should be overly concerned. I think we can just go e4 and break in the center. And h3 is defended. If pawn takes, knight takes, I think that's fine. Okay. Queen d6. All right. I suppose that threatens this. Although our queen is defending it, so it's not a problem. Part of me is tempted to fianchetto the other bishop, because it looks like a nice diagonal. This knight I don't think should be moved. We could consider rook e1. Preparing this, but also just defending the pawn. c3 I think is always a good move in these positions. That's also tempting. Okay, I'm going to go rook e1. Rook e1 is going to be a good move as well. It can't be bad. I don't think I'm missing any tactics or anything like that. The black position is a bit passive to be launching big attacks. Okay, so knight d7, stopping the e5 fork, which of course makes sense. If knight f3, he can take, so that's not going to work. Knight b3, that looks a bit silly. Maybe knight f1 is the way to go. I like that. I like knight f1. Just defending h2, getting rid of any possibilities. Maybe the knight even wants to come to g3, but the point is that this bishop is now open. Okay, castle queenside. Very aggressive. Very aggressive. c3 still looks nice. Preparing b4. Bringing the queen over. Bishop e3 looks viable, but I suppose d4. Maybe we should start with c3. The reason I'm not too concerned about the kingside is because there's no pawn break, right? The only kind of pawn break is f5, but how is black going to play that? If he goes like knight h7, trying to play f5, I mean, is that really viable? Is that really viable? I don't know. I'm not convinced. Not particularly convinced. Okay. This I'm happy with. I'm okay with a queen trade here. Because I think our structure is better. And we have the bishop pair. Yeah, I think I'm happy with this. Something like bishop e3. Targeting this diagonal. I think our king is very safe. Let's see if okay. I suppose bishop g5 would have to be the move. Because the rook needs to be defended because of this. And also, bishop g5 is tactically defending the e4 pawn because of the pin on the bishop. Our bishop can't even be removed very easily either, which is very, very good. Because this pin is difficult to break because there's no pawn h6. Again. Ooh. Well, okay, we should take that, of course, and not allow black to double up. What does he take with? The king? Well, I'll obviously just give a check then. And how do we continue? Bishop f4 looks interesting, kicking the king, but rook d8 is still on the way regardless. Pawn e5 is obviously the move we want to play, making the knight move and winning the bishop. But if pawn e5, knight d5, defending the bishop, if we take, then knight takes and black is fine. If here, and we take, if he takes back, then we win the bishop. But if he takes our bishop, we don't have a follow-up. I think knight e3 is an interesting move. So that if e5 knight here, we have knight takes with check. That would be the key idea. Obviously, there is rook to d8 going for a rook trade, which I assume he's going to play no matter what. I can't really stop it either. Can't really stop it. If rook here, I can consider rook d4. Because if take, you know, it improves our structure. and e5 is on the way. But I suppose if rook d8, rook d4 is probably just pawn e5, forcing my rook to make a decision and stopping me from going pawn e5. So I'm not sure that helps. If rook here, check king c8, keeping an eye on the rook. Not sure we accomplish anything. Yeah, kind of a waste. So if rook d8, king d8, pawn e5, knight d5, knight d5, bishop g5, knight back. That's no good. That's no good. Can I go bishop takes? Oh, well, doesn't that just lose? I think that's just losing because of pawn e5. Okay. Okay, there we go. I'm very confused as to why rook d8 wasn't played, because even if black misses this tactical opportunity... By the way, knight b8 can be played. Knight b8 can be played, defending the bishop, right? It's just passive. It's just passive, so I'm not concerned about it. I mean, I don't even know if I want to take. Bishop f4 looks stronger to me. Just avoiding the trade and basically saying, okay, your knight has no way into the game. If g5, I'll just drop the bishop back. And if the knight comes to h6, it can't come into the game, right? If the knight can't move, then the rook can't come to d8 to trade itself off. Now, the knight can go to h6, but it's got nowhere to go beyond that. I'm trying to restrict the black position. c4 is also potentially viable. But I like our pressure on c6. It makes rook d8 harder. f5. Okay, that's a big move. But it loses because of en passant with check. And both pieces are hanging. We're threatening g7, and bishop d6 doesn't save the bishop because we control that square twice. So that's just game over, effectively. And we can facilitate more trades with bishop d6. Let's take, and then we'll take. We're up a whole piece, so we don't have to think too hard. Let's go rook d4. So I can play pawn b4 check. King f1 stopping the infiltration. Obviously, we're winning, but like we don't want to give black unnecessary chances to invade with his king or with his rook or anything like that. That would be unnecessary. If f4, then he can go rook e3. Then we can go king to f2, and the rook would have to retreat. There's no infiltration. So rook back. Then we can go pawn b4 check, kicking the king away. And there's no king c4, which is why we went rook to d4. Okay, and then we should just offer a rook trade. Now that the king is out of the game, if a5, just a3. Okay, well, that's a free rook. And, okay, GG. All right, so 3 very interesting games. I'll do a brief analysis of this game, and we'll call it a day there. So let's jump into it. Okay, so I did actually miss a much earlier win in that game. So if you spotted it, well done. And if you didn't, then we're about to find out. So, again, King's Indian. Castles, e6, d3. I didn't like knight h5 here because of bishop e4 and the engine. I actually think bishop g4 is the better move. Because, yeah, if h3, bishop back, I don't have g4 because the knight hangs. So, knight f6, knight h4 is the best move. Okay, bishop g4. Knight d2 is wrong. Well, it's okay, but it's not the best. The reason I didn't like h3 is because after bishop h5, I thought g4 was incorrect. Now, the engine comes up with this weird knight fd7 move, hitting the knight, and after knight back, bishop back, it thinks that black is slightly better. I was more concerned about something like knight takes, and after h takes, not queen h4, but bishop takes g4, forcing my knight back and going something like queen f6. Engine says that I'm an idiot for being concerned, which, okay, fair enough. But the move here is actually f4, which I didn't consider at all. And then after knight fd, sorry, let's say knight bd7, queen e1. Are we just going for a quick e4 then? Say bishop e7, e4, de4, de4. Let's say castles. h3, bishop h5, g4, bishop back. Oh, wow, okay. Still not over, though, because after ef5, ef5, knight g4, our knight's under attack. So if take, our queen's under attack, queen d1. Still a bit more to the game. Bishop g3. Here, knight d2 is the only move, because if we take queen h4, gf7, rook f7, rook f7, knight e5, what? And then rook f5 only move, check, king f1, we're winning. Okay. I went knight d2. I just wanted something nice and simple. Bishop e7, h3, and then g4 is the best move. I figured this was a completely different story, because after knight back, I don't care if the bishop comes in. It's just a bishop. I was concerned about the queen. So here would be fine. The bishop g6, I take. e4 is slightly better. I was slightly concerned about like the knight taking at some point with tempo, but I suppose I always have knight takes bishop with tempo on the rook. So I went knight g6, hg6, e4, and we're slightly better. Queen d6 is not a brilliant move. Rook e1 is fine. Knight bd7 stopping pawn e5. Here the engine wants g5 and knight f3, which looks very strange. If take were worse, we have to take with a rook, which also looks strange. Okay, I chose knight f1. I thought this was an easy move to play. Engine isn't convinced by it. But castle queenside is a blunder. Can you figure out why? I missed this during the game. Can you figure out why? So the move I played, c3, is fine. It's fine. But e5 is winning. Simply forking. And there's obviously knight e5. But I have bishop f4. And there's no knight f6 check because of queen f3 defending. So after knight fd7, defending the knight, we have d4. And the knight is lost. I missed that. I'm sure some of you saw it. c3, de4. de4 is wrong. d4 is the move, which is very strange. But the engine thinks that black is better here after knight c5. And here, the only move is bishop g5 to try and fight on. Problem is that two of these things are hanging. And if I go for a move like rook e1, then I'm just super passive. Super, super passive. Engine quite likes knight d3. And if I take here and go something like take, I still have to go bishop g5 to defend the pawn. If I go like knight g3, I'm just getting overrun. So bishop g5, not relinquishing control of the d file, and of course this can't be taken because of bishop e7. And if the other knight takes, then take and bishop e7. So my opponent goes rook d7, which really surprised me. Engine likes knight a4, targeting b2, which, to be fair, I'm not really sure how to defend that easily. Engine suggests rook d8, rook d8, rook b1, which seems like the only way to do it. And after e5, I can't really play knight e3 because of rook d2. So it's difficult to play this. Difficult position. But rook d7 is strange because it allows us to take. Rook d1 check, king c7. Here the engine wants the immediate e5. Because if knight d5... Oh, I completely miss rook takes. I completely miss rook takes. I had calculated bishop takes. And I was like, well, after bishop g5, we retreat the bishop, and black is much better. Which is completely correct. I'm losing this pawn. But the point is rook takes. Rook takes. Because if bishop g5, then rook c5, then I'm up a piece. And if he takes my rook, then I obviously take his bishop. And then the knight moves. And then, well, I'm up 2 pieces for a rook. Not the easiest conversion ever, because this pawn is almost lost. Knight e3, knight b2, something like that. So it's not easy. Maybe c4 is... Yeah, c4 is the move. But I went knight e3. And here, black must play e5. I also thought he might go rook d8. In which case, I was going to take and have to take. I did see knight c4 as a possibility. Trying to come into the position. Although I was slightly concerned about e4, I have to say. I suppose this is just always an issue, targeting both of these pawns. If we take this, trying to relieve some pressure, Engine really likes black here, probably because of knight a4. But my opponent goes b5. And after e5, knight g8, black is actually okay. See, taking would be terrible. After knight takes, black is completely fine. Even though material is equal, knight a4 is such a strong threat. Bishop f4 is the move. Declining the trade, because it's quite hard for black to develop. Here, there are 2 moves for black. One is knight a4, as you might have expected by now. And if I defend, then g5, which is the other move. And if my bishop comes back, bishop c5. And then the engine suggests knight f5. What? And if this, then e6 with check, king b6, and b4. What on earth? Bishop back, rook d7. I'm just going to use the bishop pair. That's nuts. Of course, my opponent blundered with f5, though. And after ef6, the game is over. Because I'm just winning everything. And we don't need to go through this too much. But yeah, very interesting game. I'm learning an awful lot about the King's Indian by playing these games and analyzing these games. And I'm also going to be watching some other YouTube videos about it in my own time to try to learn more so I can get it across to you guys. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, you can see the first episode of the series over here. And if you want to see the entire series, which depending on when you watch this video might only have 2 videos, it might have like 20. I don't know, but the playlist will be down there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those.